may be seated. Just a reminder that it is now just past 11:30, which means that we have Tat Shabbat on the other side of the building going on right now. I see at least one Tat who was in here before who's not in here anymore, and so hopefully that means they're singing in Tat Shabbat and reading some stories. So feel free to, if you have grandchildren in the building or children in the building, you can send them over. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who is an esteemed author, respected halachist, and all-around mensch, who I quote a lot here, teaches a number of philosophy classes at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. He teaches philosophy of prayer, conservative Judaism, and biomedical ethics, among others. And in each class he teaches, no matter what it's about, there's a moment or two in which he stops all conversation with the reminder that we should start preparing for the end of our lives right now. Speaking to a room of mostly students in their 20s and 30s, he asks, have you completed an advanced directive? Have you completed a property will or an ethical will? Have you checked with your parents, your aunts and your uncles, your brothers and sisters to see if they are prepared too? Rabbi Dorff's reasoning explains beyond the halachic, beyond the confines of Jewish text and tradition. The reason to start planning early, he says, is that you want your family members to still be speaking with each other after you're gone. No one wants to think about the end of her or his life before the time is ripe, and yet, planning for the end of life is something that every adult should be doing right now. By planning for death in the prime of life, you assure that your memory will be respected after you are gone, and you assure that your loved ones will have enough of your affairs taken care of that they can mourn for you with the highest possible comfort and intention. In the Jewish tradition, the mitzvah of Leviat HaMet, guiding the deceased from death to burial, is seen as the ultimate chesed shel emet, the act of compassionate faith. We adopt this phrase, chesed shel emet, from our ancestor Yaakov's speech to his son Yosef in today's Parsha. As he instructs Yosef on where to bury him, he asks Yosef to do him this chesed ve'emet, this act of compassion and faithfulness. He tells Yosef where exactly to bury him, hands over to Joseph the land of Shechem to deal with expenses, outlines which sons and grandsons will inherit what, and even creates a sort of ethical will describing the specific message he wants to convey to each of his sons in intricate biblical poetry. Yaakov makes these requests because he knows the personal toil of being in love with one who did not have concrete plans upon her death. When Rachel died on the way from Padan Aram to Ephrat years earlier, Yaakov buried her, his wife, on the side of the road. The medieval commentator Sforno remarks that Yaakov was so weak with mourning that he could not physically or emotionally journey with his beloved Rachel's body to the next town. He did not have the strength to make plans in the moments after her death. So now, towards the end of his own life, Yaakov regrets his inability to be buried with Rachel. In the days after the death of a loved one, even today, it is difficult to balance technical arrangements with crippling grief. Yaakov, like Rabbi Elliot Dorff, knows the great chesed shel emet of arranging affairs early enough for mourners to still be able to have their space in the moments after a death. In homage to Yaakov's instructions to bury him in the cave of Machpelah with his ancestors and with his wife Leah, we, and we includes you, have an obligation to plan and to plan early for where, how, and with whom we will be buried. In the vein of making sure that your family members are able to speak to one another civilly after your death, if you have the financial resources to reserve a burial plot and pay for funeral home expenses, now is the time. If not, your family should know where those expenses will come from when the time will eventually come. While Jewish tradition specifies burial in a plain pine box and the funeral service contains some standard prayers, now is the time to let family members know whether there are aspects of the funeral itself that you want to look or feel a specific way. If there's poetry or song or a dress code that you want included in your burial service, you may let your descendants know for the sake of both the respect of those arranging your affairs and their respect of you. In addition to burial rites, in the time between death and burial, Jewish tradition offers the rituals of shmirah and tahara. With shmirah, there's always a person present with the body between death and burial, assuring that the soul of the deceased is kept company in the uncertain time before final rest. With tahara, the body itself is washed of impurities and prepared in such a way that it is able to sacredly and cleanly make its way back to its beginning as the dust of the earth. Both rituals contain specially crafted prayers to comfort the soul on its tenuous journey. For the honor of your soul and of millennia of Jewish tradition, you may choose to make clear to those who follow you your preference for Jewish customs like shmirah or tahara, or not. A quick plug and a quick aside: if you would be willing to learn how to perform the mitzvah of tahara, of cleaning and preparing the bodies of the deceased for burial, specifically Beth Torah's deceased, please get in touch with several people who are in the room right now. We have Debbie Wills, we have Jeff Markowitz, and then also Marilyn Guzik and Gary Kahalnik. You could also get in touch with me. Our Chevra Kadisha is always looking for volunteers, especially but not exclusively those who have experience with reading Hebrew and those who have experience with body mechanics. Returning to the conversation of preparing our families for our eventual death, we come to the practical discussion of how to deal with material and medical affairs. With today's technology, the end-of-life conversation begins earlier and earlier, with many falling ill and staying ill long before death. For the ease of your family, please make clear to them your medical preferences should you one day be unable to make those decisions on your own. Because of the unique connections your loved ones have with you, each may want something different when the time comes to make big decisions. Honor that with an advanced directive shared with all those close to you. Honor that by electing one individual as your medical proxy and explain your decisions to those you love. As the conservative movement has published Jewish medical directives for healthcare, it's a great tool that I can always send you. I can print out a copy for you, or even act as a witness or a spiritual advisor when you fill out this document, either alone or with family in the future. Another quick but important aside, I think, hopefully to dispel a common misconception: Jewish law and tradition encourages organ donation. So do not hesitate to let your family know your accepted responsibility to donate if that becomes feasible. Now, of course, as Jacob did, creating a will for the distribution of your assets is crucial to both keeping your family together and making sure that your belongings go to where you want them. I know that my family is not the only family that contains several people who have held grudges for decades after a seemingly unfair distribution of inheritance. And if you have family stories or values you want to pass down to those who come after you, as Jacob does in your Parsha, creating an ethical will or recording your story will preserve those accomplishments and experiences for which you have lived your life. You can share what you want the world to look like after you're gone, or you can share your life story, who you are and how you made it here. Thinking about the end of life can be terrifying. We do not know exactly where we are going or what is going to happen to our identities when we get there, but planning for that end at least preserves the concrete parts of ourselves that we leave behind. When mourners in their community perform the chesed shel emet, of accompanying the deceased to the cemetery and making sure that all of their needs are taken care of after the funeral itself, if that chesed shel emet is planned beforehand, it becomes not only an act of kindness for the deceased, but for the mourners as well. Yaakov, the founder of Israel, sets in motion the Jewish custom of preparations for end of life. At the very end of our parsha, the end of the book of Genesis, Yosef follows his father's lead by asking that his bones be carried back to the land of Canaan after his death. In our Haftarah, King David instructs his son Shlomo on how to carry on his legacy and walk in God's paths. In our Jewish tradition, end-of-life planning should not be seen as taboo, but rather as something that our ancestors have embraced throughout history. If you've not begun yet, start thinking today about what will happen to you and your family when your time inevitably comes. Give yourself ample time to work out the details, knowing that the process may be an emotional one, probably will be an emotional one. Bring your loved ones into the conversation so that they can support you and so that they can become accustomed to knowing that as wonderful as you are a human being whose time here is limited. Ultimately, you have the power to offer your family the comfort of knowing that they can support you in exactly the ways that you would want them to support you. Shabbat Shalom. I would love to invite